Gather around, children, I am the Candy Cadet, and I will tell you a story. On a very bright and sunny day in 2018 at 1738, Zacc Paws was born inside a ball pit located inside Zacc and Puppet's Pizza just off exit 34 on Highway 11 in the sleepy little town of Zinkleborough, Colorado. He was the pride and joy of one Mr. Tom Johns and a woman by the name of Miss Swampy Paws, who would later appear on the side of a milk carton. Flash forward a couple of years and Zacc was now Quebec bound on the way to his latest restaurant, Freby's Fabulous Pizza. Now, having arrived, Zacc finds himself accompanied by his neurobotic co-worker Lolbit, who became a robot as the result of a horrible accident that we will never mention. Zacc's boss, Mr. B.A. Currency Renmaster, greeted him at the door with a welcome basket full of variously shaped sponges and one eggplant. Flashford again. You didn't miss anything. Zacc was just using the Big Bear's room and reading a Currency Dear Currency app's autobiography. It is now 11:59 p.m. and the nice eggard, it's spelt like that on purpose. Zall Flappy Knees B.A. Currency Renmaster had just arrived for his night shift. By the way, it is 9 o'clock in the middle of the night. Did I mention it was night? Because it is definitely night. Meanwhile, Zacc awoke from a peaceful nap on a toilet in the staff bathroom to find not only had his Game Boy been replaced with a PSP, but the PSP wasn't charged. The latter caused Zacc to cuss out every historically important president, Obama. After he finished his little temper tantrum, Zacc proceeded to stomp his fat little stompers all the way down to Zall's office. Upon arriving at Zall's office, Zacc demanded he return his Game Boy, a demand which promptly resulted in Zall laughing and swiftly slapping Zacc's balls like a professional ping-pong player. He then shoved Zacc out and slammed the door. After being thoroughly demoralized, Zacc waddled his tight little ass cheeks to the stage to have a good cry. Noticing their friend was acting up, Lolbit decided to go and ask him what was wrong. "What's wrong?" inquired Lolbit. "Who asked?" replied Zacc, which promptly turned Lolbit into a sobbing whore. Well, these two effeminate, gender-neutral, and male mama lovers cried their little hearts out. Zall was busy preparing his well-muscled arm for his daily heroin overdose. Zall unbuttoned his shirt, revealing his do not risicate tattoo and erect pierced nipples. He proceeded to try and find a vein. After succeeding, he tied a condom he found in the trash around his arm and prayed today was the day he wouldn't survive, before pushing the syringe into his arm and moaning as the heroin pumped through his veins and his eyes rolled back into his head. A little Taiwanese boy doing the Cabbage Patch dance through his head. He supposed the boy must be mocking him for all of his past failures. Zall had never been able to accomplish much in his miserable 32 years on this planet. He had wanted to be a lawyer, but after 3 failed attempts at the bar, he turned to the military, enlisting with the Marines. Basic had been the one thing he could pass, the only thing he managed to pass, and the thing he regretted the most. 6 months after passing, he'd been shipped to Iraq just in time for the Second Battle of Fallujah. Now that had been hell, sniper fire whizzing by, kicking up dust, depriving your lungs of air and briefly blinding you. Zall remembered being pinned on a rooftop waiting for reinforcements, watching his entire platoon get picked off one at a time. But he had lived. Why him? He wondered, why was he special? Why had he deserved to live and not so many others? After being discharged, he searched for that answer at the bottom of every bottle of booze he could find, until finally he crashed his car into a family headed back from a Chuck E. Cheese. Good riddance. They never had a chance. That was when Zacc realized he had a problem, so he attended AA meetings and eventually was a year sober. Then he reconnected with his old high school sweetheart, got married, had a kid and found a steady job peddling insurance. Of course he still had to see a shrink for the PTSD, but everything was good, until he came home and found a man in bed with his wife. Zacc snapped. They never found the bodies and his daughters Emily went to live with a nice family in Michigan. Zacc then contacted his dad, who hooked him up with work in Quebec, and that brings us to the present day. Meanwhile, Zacc and Lolbit were playing a horrible game of chess, so horrible I can't bear to describe it, so I'll leave that up to your imagination. Zacc, being the sole loser he is, slapped the board into Lolbit's face, causing pieces to become lodged in their supple flesh. Lolbit then proceed to perfectly replicate a dial tone sound while simultaneously evacuating their tears all over Zacc's fresh and new sketches they registered, sponsored. Luckily Zacc had 14 more pairs handy. After changing into a fresh set of kicks, Zacc decided to leave Lolbit to their sniveling and check in on Zacc. Upon arriving at his office, Zacc noticed Zacc was doing the worm, nice moves, and frothing at the mouth. Fearing the worst, Zacc went to grab the nearby defibrillator but accidentally grabbed the fire extinguisher instead, which somehow still revived Zacc. Zacc slowly opened his eyes and looked up at Zacc, realizing quickly that death swarm embrace had once again been thwarted by some nosy little do-goober. Deciding he couldn't stand to be here another second, Zacc handed Zacc the keys, told him to lock up, and headed home to take a cold shower and sleep on the floor. Once Zacc had exited and Zacc shook off his momentary shock, he decided to snoop on Zacc's gaming computer. Not being a computer hacker or even very smart, he decided to start opening files, finding 1 TB of baby sensory videos, a pirated copy of Portal 3, unedited and unreleased The Oddities Ascent videos, a PDF of the Communist Manifesto, a tech support scam script, and in his desk a weird sponge that was so hard Zacc mistook it for a brick at first. Just then the replacement night guard walked in, and upon seeing what Zacc was up to chased him. Zacc awoke trapped under a laundry basket with the aforementioned sponge atop it. Looking to his left, he noticed Lolbit was still crying for some reason. Looking to his right, he noticed that Zacc had returned and was now dressed as a lobster for some reason. Zacc, seeing that Zacc was now awake, screamed at the top of his lungs, "Ron, Ron, go get him!" After which a burly man dressed in a sun-bleached rainbow bunny costume that was a few sizes too small stumbled out of Lolbit's ass and bounded over to Zacc, where he proceeded to relentlessly give him wet willies. Zacc suddenly awoke, passed on the floor in a puddle of drool with Lolbit shaking him frantically. Zacc turned to Lolbit and asked them where Ron was. "Who's Ron?" replied Lolbit, but just as they said that, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Ron emerged from Lolbit's ass, accompanied by the sweet guitar riffs of Carlos Santana. At that very moment a giant meteor on a crash course for Earth came hurtling through the sky on direct path to destroy Freby's fabulous pizza world, and the Earth, right before it hit, Zacc in an impeccable Wile E. Coyote impression said, "I hope this doesn't affect the development of FNAS 64, a little Zacc appears holding a sign that says, "Zacc Mama." Zacc awoke from a deep restless slumber to a distant sound of beeping. Upon opening his eyes and surveying his surroundings, Zacc came to the conclusion that he was currently in the ICU ward of Zipper McGraw Memorial Hospital. The incessant beeping originating from a heart monitor Zacc was attached to, letting him know for the time being he was still alive. Suddenly feeling very tired, Zacc fell back in a decidedly more peaceful slumber. A few hours later, Zacc was awoken by a presence in the room. The presence was none other than Frebby himself. Upon realizing Zacc was awake, Frebby went on a long speech about something unimportant, but Zacc didn't listen to any of it because he was too busy playing Zaccy Bird on his phone. Frebby, seemingly annoyed, was about to smack Zacc upside the head but was interrupted by a doctor who had come in to let Zacc know he had been discharged and was free to go. After changing out of his robe into a gyro, Zacc followed Frebby outside and got into his 2001 Ford Taurus. The drive back to the restaurant was silent, which gave Zacc time to wonder what he had missed. 15 minutes later they arrived at the restaurant. Zacc got put and looked up at the sign, which now read Frebby's Fabulous Flapjack Emporium. Confused, Zacc turned to Frebby and questioned him about the name change. Frebby then explained that 3 months after Zacc fell into a coma, a 6-year-old blonde tow-headed boy named Zali had choked to death on an unpeeled grape while his mother had been preoccupied hitting on the animatronics. Frebby explained that due to that incident they'd had to close down for a few months. During the shutdowns, all had shown up at Frebby's house naked, covered in dirt in the pouring rain, and had pitched the idea of reinventing the restaurant to Frebby. Frebby loved it, and now here we are. Zacc, realizing he didn't care that much, accepted the update and marched into the restaurant to assume his old post. Upon stepping foot into the restaurant, Zacc noticed the lights were off. Thinking the power was out, Zacc went to try and turn the lights on. As soon as Zacc had flipped the switch, the lights turned on, and all Zacc's grandma, his old high school principal, and Matthew Patrick all jumped out and yelled some fries. The shock caused Zacc to jump backwards, where he accidentally bumped into his welcome back cake, knocking it over. The cake hit the floor and the candles, which someone had lit for some reason, bounced out and one landed directly on the tablecloth, igniting it. The tablecloth burst into flames and caught the nearby sculpture of Zacc that Zol had made out of fireworks. The fireworks flew everywhere, setting the entire place aflame. Thinking quickly, Zol grabbed everyone, put them on his shoulders, fireman's carry style, and jogged for the exit. Once outside, they called the fire department. Sadly, they weren't able to salvage anything. Even sadder, Frebby didn't have insurance and was now bankrupt. The end.